yesterday, the special prosecutor decided that he's going to bypass any type of appeals court and wants to go straight to the Court for a decision on whether or not presidential immunity applies in the federal elections case against Donald Trump as far as elections interference. I
Well,
wonder, does it seem to you that this should have been an issue decided well before this?
oh, yes, but the reality is that Merrick Garland was slow to appoint a special
Yeah.
prosecutor, and Jack Smith has been very aggressive but very careful not to open any prospect for Donald Trump of being able to
Hmm.
claim error. In this matter, Trump contends that anything he did as president is covered by presidential immunity. Uh, that's absurd. If that's the case, as president, he could shoot and kill somebody. And after all, he said, I could shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue and not lose a
Right.
vote.
Not new
And
for
he would
him.
be held to account for it.
Right.
So the issue here is in telling the crowd to go to the Capitol and not doing anything for more than 3 hours to stop the insurrection as people were calling for killing his vice president, Mike Pence, Nancy Pelosi, and others. Was that an official act of the president? And Trump says, of course it is. I have the absolute right to do that. And besides, I said to him, go in peace. Yeah, right. After you riled them all up, you threw in that little line. Now, the Supreme Court has rules that allow a direct appeal if you can show that a matter is of overwhelming public importance. And the overwhelming issues of public importance here are first and foremost that the people, you and I, are entitled to a speedy trial.
Mm-hmm.
And that if this doesn't move forward, Trump could undo his prosecution if he gets back to the White House. So I fully expect the Supreme Court will act pretty quickly on this. Trump has until next Wednesday to file why the court shouldn't hear the case, not the merits of it, but why they shouldn't hear it. It'll be fascinating to see what cockamamie nonsense his lawyers come up with. And then the court will decide whether it needs to hear arguments or not. But I expect Trump will lose because earlier, Chief Justice of the United States, John Roberts, in an opinion where Trump tried to avoid subpoenas, held that right up top that the courts are entitled to every man's evidence. The president is not a king. He is as accountable as anyone else. So I fully expect the court, at least by a 7-2 vote, it is possible that Clarence Thomas and Sam Alito will oppose it, will support the government's motion. It would be very good for the Republic if Chief Justice Roberts can produce a unanimous decision by the court.
Here's the question, though. You say by a 7-2 vote, but this is a court that swings conservatively, that seems to go with, whatever conservatives are looking for. I don't have faith that they'll do what's right here.
Well, first of all, evading law enforcement is not a conservative principle.
Mm-hmm.
I don't care for the jurisprudence of Justice Neil Gorsuch, and I've written critically about him, but he is a principled man. Right. I just don't like his view of the world. There's no way that Justice Gorsuch is going to go along. And to accept Jack Smith's plea, 5 of 9 justices had to agree they were going to hear it. So we already know there's a majority who think this is worthy of going directly to the Supreme Court.
Right.
And by the way, I don't consider Clarence Thomas and Alito to be conservatives. They're authoritarians on the bench. Yeah. Clarence Thomas, who I've said on this show before, is well qualified to be a traffic court judge, and I don't mean to insult traffic court judges. Mm-hmm. There's no business being there.
Yeah.
But the court has been pretty clear about the institutions of the government, and I can't see any prospect under which this court would throw the American democracy under the bus as a favor to Donald Trump.
Also, along the same lines, Smith says he's got a cell phone or cell phone records that he wants to bring forward and use. And so I guess the same question would be applicable. And that is then, if you're going to argue presidential immunity, then any phone, cell phone, landline technology that you used while you were a sitting president of the United States, would that then fall under presidential immunity?
Well, that would fall under rules of evidence. And Trump would certainly try to argue that this is part of presidential immunity. I think it's reasonable to believe, now that we know Donald Trump spilled the beans about how close our submarines can get to Russian submarines, something that as taxpayers we have invested billions upon billions of dollars in developing super silent submarines with screws, propellers, that don't produce air bubbles and are very, very quiet. To have given this information to this Australian businessman, along with a lot of other secrets, if you think that's the only time Donald Trump did that, I think you are gullible enough that I'll offer to sell you the Brooklyn Bridge. It's who Donald is. He's been that way his whole life. There is no muffler on him. Whatever comes into his mind, I thought it was put pretty well by Mitt Romney the other day. He's like a human gumball machine. You put in a thought or a penny, and out comes the gumball or the whatever thought is on his mind. And I'm certain that there are serious national security crimes Donald Trump has committed since leaving the White House for which he can never be prosecuted, because to do so would reveal sources and methods. How did we learn that? Who did we learn it from?
Drives me crazy.
And we're not going to do that. I mean, we still keep some sources and methods secret from World War II. I don't know about World War I, but I know there are some we keep secret from World War II, which ended almost 80 years ago.
Smith seems to, by asking for the Supreme Court to weigh in and weigh in quickly, is that a bit of bravado on his part? Like he's so sure that they'll come down on his, that he's like, give it to me. Yeah.
This kid, the filing by Jack Smith demonstrates his total confidence in what he's doing. Yeah. And he's also added to his team a fellow whose name I would mispronounce, so I'll let it go, but a fellow who for years, decades, was the Deputy Solicitor General for criminal matters, who has argued more than 100 times in front of the Supreme Court. So this is a guy who not only knows the relevant law, but he knows how to frame an argument for this court.
Yeah.
And Donald Trump and his clown car of lawyers are simply no match for the best prosecutors the Justice Department has, led by Jack Smith. They're just not a match. The only thing they can do is muddy the waters, delay, try to do anything possible. And, here's an irony. If Donald Trump really thinks that he's innocent, he should be demanding a speedy trial. Yep. I want to go to trial right now.
But it's not. It's delay. That's the tactic.
If he's innocent, and he will have humiliated Jack Smith, and frankly would probably be assured getting back into the White House. So why is Trump fighting and delaying all of these things? And the answer is obvious. Donald knows perfectly well he's committed the 91 crimes he's accused of and many more, and he doesn't want to be in front of a jury. And by the way, in the civil case in New York, he was going to testify yesterday.
Yeah.
I had said in various forums, I think on this show, that he will testify. He had been called originally as a witness by the New York State Attorney General and was shown to have made a number of false statements in that testimony. He was to then be called by his own side so that he could lay out a narrative. The problem with that is that once they've laid out the narrative, the State Attorney General's office gets to cross-examine him.
Yeah.
Donald can't keep his lies straight. If you tell the truth all the time, it's not very hard to keep things straight. But when you lie, it becomes very difficult. And Donald would have put himself in a position of a perjury rap. That's a criminal offense. He would have undermined his own case by coming up with his nonsense behavior. So I never thought there would be one. And interestingly, his lawyer, Ms. Haba, did something very bizarre in a broadcast interview. She broke attorney-client privilege. She said that she had given her client, Donald Trump, certain advice and he didn't follow it. You can get disbarred for that. I don't know if that single incident will do so, but it's indicative of how none of the highly competent criminal defense lawyers, people like Abby Lowell or Ty Cobb, will touch Donald Trump. And not just because Trump has a history of not paying people, but because he knows that they know that this would be awful for their careers and reputations.
Right. Right. So at one point, you say, well, if you're rich and you have the best money that lawyers can buy, that's, then the legal system is in the palm of your hand. Unless you're a pariah with all the money in the world, no one wants to touch you with a 10-foot pole.
Right. And by the way, it's now come out through documents, two interesting things. Trump, in fact, has been using the money people are sending to his PAC to pay part of his legal bills. Mm-hmm. And the witness he had, an eminent professor of accounting at New York University, who said that Donald Trump's financial statements were the finest sort of documents of their kind he'd ever seen. He was paid $900,000 by Donald Trump. And his testimony was absolute nonsense. I mean, Trump, in some cases, inflated the values of things from what his own appraisers said 30 and 40 times. This is I think, a very clear case of bought and sold testimony.
Yep.
By someone who's amenable to that. Everybody can't be bought, but Donald just needs to find people who can be, and he apparently succeeded with this professor.
You had mentioned that, Donald Trump was, I don't know, I guess his bravado, the way he speaks and everything. And over the weekend, he was talking about, he was at a Young Republicans convention and he was comparing himself to Al Capone. And he had also then bashed Bill Barr during the same speech. Then I was looking at this article about a former Mar-a-Lago employee who had turned witness against Donald Trump and left his job. And he was one of the ones that was moving boxes of documents around the property. And apparently after he quit, he was contacted by two of the other staffers at Mar-a-Lago who showed up at his gym, who showed up places. And it just smacked of intimidation and kind of that whole mob mentality where you show up and, you bring the heavy. I wonder if you have any words about that.
Well, we don't know if they were trying to cajole him or threaten him. That's, I think, first of all, you need to establish that's not clear. But this is absolutely improper. Trump is, in fact, under orders in other cases, not in the one in Florida, unfortunately, I believe. I could be wrong about this. But to not be in contact with people likely to be witnesses. That's not going to have any effect on Donald. He'll find proxies like people who work for him. And that's part of why Donald makes all these threatening comments about Judge Engoron's clerk, about Jack Smith's wife and children, because he is trying to intimidate potential jurors and witnesses. You cross me and I will hit you 15 times, as he wrote in one of his books, talking about either Paula Poundstone or Rosie O'Donnell. And any other criminal defendant in America would be remanded, that is, held in prison, in jail, awaiting trial based on his conduct. I think he's trying to provoke a judge to do that, figuring it will get him political sympathy, because all of his public attacks on the system, they're not legal arguments. They are political arguments. And if the American public is dumb enough to not distinguish between those, then we're going to choose that that's the end of our democracy. I just don't believe that the people who vote in this country, including people who may have never voted before but are going to turn out, are so stupid. And by the way, if you're listening to this show and you think, well, I'm with Donald and I'm okay, you don't know anything about authoritarianism, because who are among the people Stalin killed, the millions of people he killed, were people in his inner circle. Hitler had people in his inner circle killed. Pol Pot. This is what dictators do. They have to, in order to maintain fear, and because they don't have trust. They cannot develop trust with people because of what they do. And in these cases, every single known witness is a Republican. Many of them are appointees of Donald Trump. Mm-hmm. And the reality is that this isn't a Democratic cabal going after him. It's his people, his appointees. Jack Smith's office interviewed every single senior national security person who dealt with Trump about the outcome of the 2020 presidential election. Put them all under oath. And every single one of them said, they told Trump, there's no fraud, you lost fair and square.
Right.
That's how thorough they have been in this matter. So, the important thing is that he needs to go to trial before the election. The best case for him to go to trial would be the Florida case, but there he has the judge who wrote in her first opinion in the case that he deserves special treatment, which is a rather blatant violation of her oath of office and of our Constitution. But she's still in charge of the case, and she's running interference for Donald Trump.
Before we move on, a question from the chat from Andrew, who writes, you really think Kavanaugh and Amy Barrett will rule against him being Trump?
Well, I would expect that with Kavanaugh. Mm-hmm. Amy Coney Barrett, I just don't know enough about. She has very little track record to follow. But you can be sure that in their debates within the court, that Chief Justice Roberts is going to emphasize that we must uphold the rule of law, we must defend the criminal system, we must defend the courts. Mm-hmm. And you only need 5 votes, and we've already got 5 votes to hear the case. The two I worry about are Scalia and Thompson and Thomas, both of whom are financially corrupt.
Right.
Both of whom have an arrogance that is extraordinary even for a Supreme Court justice. So, we'll find out when they rule, which will presumably be later this month or early in January, on whether they need to have a hearing at all, or they can simply, without a hearing, establish that no, Trump does not have immunity per se for everything he did in the White House.
If they rule that he does, all these cases are toast, right? From the documents case to everything. The only thing that would be the fraud case going on in New York, because that's separate.
No, even if they rule that he has immunity, the Mar-a-Lago case was filed in Florida instead of Washington because events happened there and Trump falsely testified. It would have, I think, little to no effect on the Atlanta case, because that was a conspiracy involving many players that continued long past the January 20th of 2021 when Biden took office. And there are elements of the January 6th case that would continue because some of the things Trump did were after January 6th, but it would be a severely compromised case. And I don't think the Engoron case would be affected at all. But it's just the people who are on the Supreme Court, except for Thomas for sure and arguably Scalia, are not craven. It's like people who go around, the Koch brothers, of which there's one of the 2 leading brothers still alive, they're just totally corrupt and craven. No, actually they're not. They have a set of principles that most people don't like and shouldn't like if they are self-interested, but they do pursue those principles. And that's an important element to keep in mind here. And you can just rest assured John Glover Roberts Jr. is going to be saying to the court, we have to look out for the long-term effect of this and the principles of having an independent judiciary and independent prosecutors.
Let's move on to something that you brought to my attention, which is the North Korean shells that apparently were sent to Russia. By us? By who? By what? They're misfiring. They're bad things. What's happening?
Well, there are all these sanctions that the Biden administration has put on Russia, and most sanctions are just cosmetic. They don't have any impact. These have had real impact on Russia. They haven't been 100% effective, but compared to the tiny, dinged you a little, Putin's getting hammered here. So he arranged to get artillery shells from North Korea, which has the 4th biggest army in the world, and an impoverished population. And the Russian soldiers have been firing these off. Now, when you fire modern artillery, there's all sorts of mathematical formulations that go into this so that you take into account the wind, the trajectory, where the person is you're trying to hit, or the group of soldiers. Right. And the charge in the shell has to have a predictable level of power. Well, these shells are so badly done, they're going all over the place. And Russian frontline soldiers are complaining about this. And we know this because the Russian army doesn't have sophisticated encrypted communications like the American army and the NATO countries. They speak over telephone lines that can be listened into. Plus, all these soldiers are allowed to have their cell phones, and they call home to mama or their girlfriend or their boyfriend.
Yeah.
And the Ukrainians and the NATO countries and the U.S., we listen into this stuff.
Yeah.
And they are bitterly complaining that about a quarter of these shells are next to useless, and some of them they think expose them. And by the way, when you fire off your artillery piece, HIMARS, if you're on the west, you now have disclosed to the other side your location. You better pack up and move real fast or you're gone. So understandably, the Potemkin army of the Kremlin is deeply worried about this. And there's an unfortunate political aspect to this. You know, the Republicans in Congress, who were the party of the Red Scare, McCarthyism, you know, there's communists all over the government, there's communists in Hollywood. They have now aligned themselves with the Kremlin. Mm-hmm. They are now the best friends Putin has. Russian state television, there is no independent television journalism in Russia. There is some online and print, although those people are at risk of getting killed every day, and a lot of them have been, or imprisoned. Russian state television has Putin bragging about how the Republicans are helping us defeat Ukraine. And it appears very clear that the Republicans don't care. They have no principle about liberty and freedom anymore. They used to always say, we're the party of liberty and freedom. Not anymore. And if I can shift gears, look what just happened to Kate Cox in Texas. Oh. A trial court judge in Austin, Travis County, rules that because her fetus isn't viable and she could and has a high chance of ending up unable to conceive again and she wants more children, could have an abortion despite the Texas law. Ken Paxton, the indicted Attorney General of Texas, goes to the Texas Supreme Court, which says, it's not for us to question the wisdom of the legislature. She can't have an abortion. That is, if the legislature passes a law that says, well, you die because you got raped by a stranger, your father, your brother, your uncle, tough luck. If the pregnancy goes bad, you may die. We have no mercy. We don't have any regard for human life. All we care about is the letter of the law. And one of the key things I teach my students, and remember, I'm not a lawyer, but I do teach law and have for many years, is that all decent laws have a mercy clause because the law cannot anticipate every situation. So you always have to have an escape route for the circumstances that no one could predict. And this woman fits them to a T.
Right. She
wants to have more children. So what the Ken Paxton, the Attorney General of Texas, and the Texas Supreme Court have declared themselves is to be anti-life. Because if she can't get pregnant again, then they're anti-life. And that they have an utter disregard for the lives of women. You know, if men had to worry about dying in childbirth every time they had sex, I suspect the world would operate a little differently. And I say this as the father of 8 children who, during the 6th and 8th pregnancies, different wives, death was an absolute real possibility.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
Well, it seems awfully cruel. This seems awfully cruel to this woman. And now she's packed up and left the state so that she can deal with her health.
Cruelty is the point. Cruelty is absolutely the point. You know, a bunch of people posted on my X Twitter and Threads feeds, well, she shouldn't have been irresponsible. It had nothing to do with being irresponsible.
She wanted the baby.
Right. You expect the Supreme Court of Texas to be better than that. They didn't even say, we wish we could provide you with relief, but we can't. They didn't do that at all. Their opinion is just awful. And what is the point of a democracy if not to allow people to live their lives, to have freedom and liberty?
And is this what the people of Texas wanted?
I don't know. They elected these folks.
one wonders, and I don't know if that means that, women who vote will make a change in Texas next time. Because if you see a highly publicized case like this, where a woman is being treated inhumanely, that can't be what we as women want for ourselves.
I would agree with you. I mean, there are a lot of women who are leaders of the movement that say no abortions, whatever, but they are a tiny minority of the population of women in this country. They do exist, and they've made themselves prominent. I think the underlying problem is that I've written for decades about how we've had a severe collapse in moral standards in this country. My focus was on all the lawyers and accountants who, in return for enormous fees, were willing to come up with sham tax shelters to help executives and business owners avoid the law. And a lot of these people lost their law licenses. Some of them went to prison. There are people who, with money is big enough, will completely abandon their moral principles and their scruples, especially if they think there's little risk to them. But at the end of the day, it's voters who make these decisions. All three of my economics books, best-selling economics books, ended with a line saying, if you don't like this stuff, it's on you. You're the voters. You may not have voted for these people, but as a class, voters did. And I got a lot of criticism from people saying, well, you're being unfair. There's this whole system. No, I'm not. At least in my humble opinion, or unhumble opinion. You don't like the government, vote in a new group of people. And you may find out they're not quite what you want either, so vote in others. But if you don't pay any attention, if you don't vote, if you allow a system where politicians have to depend on an extraordinarily thin and super rich slice of donors, then you're going to get a Congress that doesn't represent what concerns you. We have the power to change all of this, but you got to register to vote. You got to make sure your registration went through. You got to show up on election day if you want things to work.
As they say, America gets the America it deserves, right? Yeah.
Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.